Alright, before we get into the mod proper, I just wanted to point out that the folks working on the model import tool are very close to completion, and once that gets released into the wild, I think you're going to see some pretty utterly ridiculous additions into the game. We'll cover that properly when it is fully released, rest assured, but anyways, on to the main event. We're going to do another old versus new run here, this time with the adorable little halflings. So get comfy with a big old glass of milk and let's get right into it.
Wow.
So I've checked in on the halflings a few times on my own over the years, but they're in a state now that is well and truly complete. They now have a custom army with oodles of new assets in there, new battlefield abilities, a legendary lord to lead them, and even custom campaign mechanics. Now, unfortunately, you won't be able to see all of it in my footage as I was having a conflict with them and another mod that was breaking certain things, but we'll address that later on in the video. So right off the bat, one of the first things you'll experience with the halflings is their start position. It's an extremely simple early game. You have friends to the west, north, and south. You just need to focus your efforts to the east. I went after Vlad von Karstein on literally just round 2, and also because the Empire starts as an ally, you can drag them along for the fun. Conveniently, when you do take over a territory, you've got two options, either keep it for yourself or give it to the Empire. This becomes extremely helpful in certain situations, as grabbing a territory that you know you'll never be able to get much use out of, you can make it for a perfect donation to the Empire instead and get a lot more utility in its favor. As you level up the mood itself, you can have a fairly powerful single territory with special buildings for it completely, but it's limited to just 3 structures, which is pretty crippling to your options, so you really need to figure out what it is specifically that you need the moot to do. Thankfully, you really only need to hit tier 2 to start pumping out heroes, which is exactly what I did. With the von Karsteins wiped out literally in the opening few turns of the game, I could turn my attention to Sylvania and start fighting them instead. Within the early game, I'd already taken over the entirety of Sylvania, the vampires were all dead, I had a few militaries and a bunch of non-aggression packs, and corruption was starting to fade out of Sylvania. Things were really looking up, which is exactly when the rat bastards decided to pop in out of nowhere and start wrecking my crap. Now, the halflings in this mod primarily excel in 2 categories, cavalry and ranged combat. The Skaven, however, are really good at killing 2 things though, cavalry and enemy ranged combat characters. My hotpot catapults and chicken riders weren't enough compared with the lightning cannons and doom wheels of the Skaven. While the halflings have some pretty decent ambush options and ranged infantry, I was losing badly on this front, and I really enjoyed the challenge of just dealing with the Skaven. However, working against the Skaven though was the fact that they were fighting on my turf, which meant I could steadily push them back territory by territory. Kathleen the soup tank would have been super helpful here, but it wasn't actually necessary, which is useful because I didn't have it unlocked yet. I did just want to quickly loop back to that start position one more time though, because if you use the giant mod pack that I have, which I'm going to be updating soon to remove a couple things but also to add a bunch more, the region that you start with is surrounded by unique factions. In addition to all the vanilla factions, you can have Nuln give you heavy gun lines to back you up or to fight them if you're a naughty halfling. Clan Ferret, just to the southeast of you, are capable of smacking you around with their heavily armored Skaven. The Order Draconis will usually pop in from southwest and decide to start snacking on your forces on their way to Sylvania. Kislev to the north can make for an awesome ally, but also a really fervent enemy, depending on how things go back home. And then the Rotblood tribe, Fimir, and Trolls can pop in out of literally nowhere and start ruining your day. And while I didn't have them all active, or while I didn't have this last one active for this, the recent Cult of Sigmar and Ostermark should also add in a pretty interesting variable as well. However, I guess since we're on the subject of other mods, we should start with compatibility. This has been the first faction in Old vs. New's Lost Factions to have a pretty noticeable issue with other mods. The halflings seem to have snippets of the Imperial culture, snippets of Dwarven culture, and snippets of their own culture, which means mods that I have for Empire things, such as priests for specific faiths, were showing up in the halflings build tree. In spite of that though, I couldn't run a trade agreement with any Imperial force for some reason, including ones that I knew had resources available to trade, yet I could run trade agreements with any Dwarven faction that I came across. The biggest issue I had, however, was the inability to acquire culinary salt required for their halfling dishes. Their custom stance, foraging, never appeared as an option for me, and the culinary salt buildings didn't show up at all. While I'm sure part of these issues could be solved via submods, and as I've said, they do so far remain the only conflict I've had in Old vs. New, it's just a bit more of a headache trying to figure out which issue comes from where. What I would personally recommend is if you're going to do a halfling run, disable any mods that affect the Empire at large, so things like new units, new heroes, new mechanics, that kind of stuff, and then just save a new profile for your halfling run. I should mention that even in spite of this, nothing on the halflings straight up prevented me from playing. They were more just like broken additional features. But now that we've covered compatibility, let's quickly slide over to balance. As I've said, the Halflings do have their own little strengths without being overpowered or anything. I actually personally found their economy to be very unstable, which was a really good leash for the campaign. And then in battle, as I said, they are generally substandard, but they do have really good range potential, in addition to a plethora of abilities to tilt the scales in your favor. If you're the kind of guy that likes to just send your units forward and wait for the win, this particular army isn't going to do anything for you. With the Halflings, you are always doing something. Ambushing with some hidden units, repositioning your range stuff, moving a chuck wagon to resupply ammunition, flanking with cavalry, blobbing up your defenders for a mass heal. It's almost chaotic trying to manage all the variables to make sure that you're maximizing these armies' small advantages. Conclusion time then. Should you take the Halflings for a spin in your next playthrough? You know what? In spite of all the hiccups I had, I'm still going to say yes. Having only tier 4 units at best and then ripping around and trying to conquer every vampire and chaos tribe who made the mistake of looking at you is an absolute giggle fest, and I found myself analyzing strategies and adapting far more than I normally would with vanilla factions. Plus, their location provides ample room to grow without repeatedly just getting your teeth kicked in by surrounding you with enemies. That's it for this video though. Stay tuned tomorrow for the second half of our Dumb Game 3 race series. As always, I want to thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you all next time.